Did difficulty level of PSLE actually increase over the years? Statistically, it should.
So first of all, even before the administration of the exams, parents will be aware that we have removed some common last topics from the national exam.
Right.
That itself is an attempt to take into account that the learning was perhaps disrupted this year, and so we should not expect the child to be ready for examination on the full syllabus, right? We took away some topics, so that itself is helpful, I think, to mitigate some of the impact of COVID.
Common last topic is called common instead of simply last topic, because not all schools cover topics in the same sequence. Example, there are schools that cover man's impact on the environment in term 1 and energy and forces in term 2. Yet, it was man's impact on the environment that was removed rather than energy and forces, which meant that students in these schools have spent time learning these topics yet not be tested. This was actually brought up in Voices Under Today in 2020 last year, which suggested the sequence of science topics to be standardized instead of left to schools to decide the best order of delivery. However, no changes was made and the same problem occurred again this year. Link to the article is available under comments.
Parents may think that there is this rigid marking scheme that we just mark blindly to, and any responses that fall outside the marking scheme are simply ignored or marked wrong. That's not the case, right? The marking process is a professional process where the markers will take out some of the students' scripts, talk to one another about responses that don't seem to completely fall within the marking scheme, and to discuss whether those responses are also valid representation of their mastery.
This is true. Okay, this is what happens during PSLE marking. We all know teachers are assigned to marking centers during PSLE marking days. In fact, about 80% of all the teachers in Singapore are activated to mark PSLE every year. These teachers are then grouped into classrooms to be given sections of the paper to mark. So for the first 3 days, these teachers will work from 9 to 5 marking continuously on the same question, reading and rereading to make sure students are graded fairly. Their marking is based on a marking scheme. However, teachers are allowed to bring up variations from the marking scheme to be discussed with other markers who will then discuss the answers with the exam board to decide if the answers are to be included and accepted. Every now and then, new answers can be accepted and remarking can happen, which is why the 4th day of PSLE marking is like a standby day for such incidences and for closing up any gaps in marking, if any. PSLE marking is a very tedious process.
On the issue of bell curve, that's also a common misperception that parents think that there is this standard bell curve that we force students' performance to fall onto this bell curve. And that's not the case. So there's no quota for AL1, AL2 that we will somehow force fit students' performance into.
To give you a better picture, we'll first need to understand the old system so we can understand why the concern of a bell curve. The old system functions based on a formula that takes into account the cohort's average score and standard variation. For example, if the cohort did very well and the average score of everyone who has taken the paper is, say, 75, and most of them were scoring around that average by either plus 20 or minus 20. So if your actual score is 75 as well, your T-score therefore is only 50, which is the average. Assuming that your performance is exactly the same for all 4 subjects, your PSLE aggregate will therefore be 200. But what happens if the cohort didn't do very well and their average is only about 50? With your raw score of 75 and the spread of plus 20 minus 20, your T-score becomes 62.5. Assuming that your performance is exactly the same for all 4 subjects, your PSLE aggregate will therefore become 250. These calculations are how PSLE grades were normalized, which, when presented on a graph, results in what we call a bell curve. But all these are removed with the new achievement levels grading system. Although it sounds really fantastic and fair not to be ranked based on the average score of the cohort, schools are still going to pick and choose their students based on their scores. Only that now, many students are going to be having the same grades due to the very blunt categorization of scores. So instead of relying purely only on grades, now your grades for higher Chinese, your citizenship, the ordering of secondary schools when making your selection of schools, and luck becomes really important. I used to have parents who would consult me on whether or not their children should continue with higher Chinese, and the advice was usually very straightforward. If the child is not performing in the other 3 EMS subjects, then drop higher Chinese to focus on getting the extra score from English, Math and Science. However, the situation now is no longer the same. Your attempt in higher Chinese is now very important. If there are secondary schools which you would highly prefer to be in.
When the exam board sets the examination, it takes great pain to set a balanced paper, meaning that the paper would have some challenging items, but also many moderate items and also many easy items, so that students across the full spectrum have a chance to demonstrate their level of understanding.
When setting exam papers, setters are given access to a question bank of exam questions to choose from. Each question comes with a difficulty index, which is assigned through item analysis of how students pick their answers. For example, if 90% of the students chose the correct answer, that answer will be given a low difficulty score. If only 5% of the students chose the correct answer, that question will receive a high difficulty score. Setters will balance the percentage of easy and difficult questions, and the overall difficulty of PSLE papers is always similar. So yes, exam papers are set based on a known set of difficulty levels, and all these are statistically recorded from past performances of students. Therefore, doing past year's papers definitely help, and doing prelim papers of as many schools as possible also help, because all the questions are recycled and used, with slight variations of course. However, there are also always new questions that can appear, just like the Helen and Ivan's question. The concept tested is actually a common problem-solving heuristic taught in schools, but the context is usually pencils and erasers. Using coins is quite novel, to be honest. Therefore, mental flexibility is extremely important, and besides training children in solving questions, my center focuses on training children's mental flexibility so that they are able to navigate around questions of different contexts easily. Having said that, did difficulty level of PSLE actually increase over the years? Statistically, it should. Reasons being, we have a very established tuition industry which learns and teaches really efficiently, therefore making previously difficult questions seem easier and easier, with more students scoring well for it, therefore reducing the difficulty index of previously difficult questions. Therefore, more and more new styles of asking questions needs to be adopted in order to hit that percentage of having a balanced range of easy, moderate and difficult questions. And that's where Helen and Ivan came into the picture. The purpose of this video is to share information with parents so informed choices can be made. I hope this video is informative enough for you. If you have any questions, please leave your comments below and I'll try my best to answer them for you. Please like and click subscribe to be informed of new videos.